I want Season of Mastery 2. Surprised? Well, you shouldn't, since the only videos I ever make are about Season of Mastery. But what can surprise you is that more and more people are starting to share this drive for Season of Mastery once again. So why do I and many others want Season of Mastery 2? What are the alternatives? Are we just sniffing pure copium on the Blizzard Entertainment Express? Before we get into these questions, a quick recap. World of Warcraft, 4 different versions, 4 different player bases. Each version has their own unique quirks and gameplay, but one of these was Season of Mastery, that had a premise of being a seasonal based game, of which you can experience fresh servers every season with most of the gameplay and quirks from original Classic, but with some gameplay. So why, out of all of these versions of WoW, am I and many others are yearning for the version with the least players? Surely less players means it's either extremely niche or inherently worse than the other versions, right? All of the first season's declining player base can be attributed to just one major thing: consume grind meta. In the first season, they made a series of changes which added up to a massive consumables grindfest. No world buffs in raids, higher health for trash mobs and bosses, more mechanics for boss fights. Although some of these were good changes in general, altogether they made the raids longer, harder, and more reliant on consumables. That is why I and many other guilds, from my server at least, left on the first season. It felt bitter to leave my rank 13 warrior and my priest all behind, but it was a choice of grinding every hour for consumables in the hopes of progression and begging gold during your raid for a repair cost, or just calling it. My guild and the other guilds from my server and many on the forums had the same problem with this consume grind meta. Well, I can't speak for the rest of the player base on what they did after leaving the first season, but what I did was that I went straight to the other versions, and I was just switching to them one by one. I went from Season of Mastery to TBC Classic to Lich King Classic to Dragonflight in a span of months. Neither had my tastes. TBC Classic was just turning into a brutal gladiator grind set. Lich King's leveling was just so slow and mundane that I just gave up at level 72 on my warrior, and Retail's content was just kinda lackluster in terms of the dungeons and raids. The only enjoyable part of all of that was probably in Retail when I was doing a dungeon group and we did a full BRD run. That's a vanilla dungeon from original Classic. It hit me right then and there. I remembered every single encounter I had in BRD back in Classic and in the first season of Mastery. I just liked the old dungeons better. I liked the older raids better, the old social aspect that everyone seems to be missing. I liked it all, and especially the old AV battles instead of just rushing to the boss that a lot of people seem to do in TVC and stuff like that. It was all that I could ever think about. And with the first season about to kick the bucket, the second season could be that itch I've been needing, and a lot of other itches around the fucking world right now. I believe that once the first season rolls over, they should at least really acknowledge what went wrong with the first season and correct that, along with actually announcing the next season so we can stop speculating at this point. And for the next changes, I hope they look strongly into what will be affected when they do make a change. I think they could fix a lot of those problems by doing these. Number 1. Either return world buffs with a better, more streamlined approach than Chrono Boon, or only allow world buffs to be active during raids or in BGs, or buffing each class to compensate for no world buffs. Number 2. Have raid difficulty options like they did with Season of Mastery, AQ and Nax, but the normal difficulty is just like original Classic 2019 raids, but the next difficulties add the more harder mechanics that you saw in the later Season of Mastery raids, and they actually just increase the loot drop amount, so you can look forward to actually increasing your difficulty. With those options outlined, I believe they would fix the problems that the first one had. As for the new changes, I think they should focus on a few things at least. Number one, bit niche here, but I think they should redesign the dungeon purples, at least the ones that suck, because not every single dungeon purple is actually good, and they should at least redesign some of them to make them more viable to hold until a raid replacement. Number two, add new mounts to the 50 to 60 dungeons. There's always a reason to go back to Stratholme, for example, not just because of the prebis, because of a nice mount. Number three, make the clown specs less clown and more viable in raids and dungeons. They don't have to be fully redesigned, but just enough so that way they don't have to be a clown spec and they can actually be viable enough. They don't have to be goats like Fury Warriors or Combat Rogues. They can just be viable. Number four, only two servers, one PvE, one PvP. If the population booms, damn, just increase the servers. You don't have to just have like 10 servers and just like have the community try and figure out where the population is going to be mostly in. Number five, more dungeons and raids and extend the season for longer to compensate for the new content. I mean, a lot of people are asking for Classic Plus. They're asking for a lot of content, and obviously Season of Mastery isn't vanilla. It's just vanilla with some changes, but they can add new content, and a lot of people would like that. You can definitely see it in the forums. You can see it everywhere. So it would really make Season of Mastery even more unique. And number six, shuffle the items around. No one likes grinding the Emperor in phase, I think it's like 4, when Hand of Justice got moved over there for their prebis. Like, no one really wants to grind for that. And, like, they don't want to constantly grind it constantly. Like, change around where the items could be, mix it up so that way they can't just rely on Wowhead. They have to actually find where their prebis items are. And that way they can actually figure out everything. Some of those, like, options that I outlined for the new changes, some of them are out there, some of them are unique, some of them are small and niche, some of them could be a little bit too much, but you know what? It does at least help to have some conversation about this. After the decline of the first season's player base, Blizzard could even take a U-turn and they could just stop Season of Mastery altogether instead of fixing and improving what they did. I hope that they don't give up on this, but if they do, I would at least hope for a plain vanilla or vanilla plus at least, as most I would assume would want that at least. But that's pretty much all I gotta say on this. What do you think will happen, and what are you hoping for with Season of Mastery, or at least a Classic Plus, for example? Because I'm really hoping that they do some major changes with Season of Mastery so it feels like Classic Plus, but it also doesn't detriment anything in terms of gameplay, like the Consume Grindfest. Cheerio.